another episode of Unfiltered. So last week we left off with our hijab conversation. This is hijab part two. I just want to go ahead and introduce each of our guests. We, of course, have Umama, myself. We also have Amina, and I just want the others to introduce themselves.
My name is Kainat.
My name is Bushra.
Okay, so last week we left off talking about hijab in our lives, and of course, all of our friends that came on gave their own personal experiences, and they were able to talk about what the hijab means to them when they started wearing it, all of that. But what I do want to start talking about today in this part two is hijab in America, our lives as are we Muslim Americans or are we American Muslims? I do want to emphasize on that. So, does anyone want to go ahead and jump into that?
I'll jump into.
You're muted. Mama, you were muted, by the way.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'll just start talking. But basically, what I wanted to say was, even in the past episode, we emphasized, are you a Muslim looking at Islam through an American lens, or are you a Muslim looking through Islam through a Muslim lens? And I feel like what we also mentioned on the last pod was like, okay, what's stopping us from either being hijabi or like, I know a lot of us were thinking about it. And one of the things was, when you live in America, there's a lot of like external factors that come into play with becoming a hijabi. And one of the major things would be being American. And I know for a fact, even touching on to Halima's story, the reason are, a lot of us are going to become young professionals. Me specifically, I will be working in like the finance field. And right as it is, there aren't a lot of women in that field. And on top of that, like being a minority by being a female, and then on top of that, being a woman that has like, is Muslim, and on top of that, like if I were to practice the hijab, it just makes everything harder. But obviously, like, everyone has their own struggles. But I feel like that's one thing that also stops people from wearing it, is because of, being a young professional in America, or just being American in general.
I want to ask, are you guys all familiar with Halima's story and what she had posted throughout? I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I believe, or something. Are you guys all familiar with that?
Yeah.
So does anyone want to touch back on that? Does anyone want to like summarize like what it was all about?
So I mean, for me, like I kept rereading it because it was just so, I think, refreshing to see something like that, especially in a time when we're so used to people like gaining a lot of momentum in social media and in like, a big career field like fashion, and taking off the hijab just because that's the easier thing to do. But she did the complete opposite. She came on this platform in which she has a lot of non-Muslim, people that are watching her as well, and said, no, I'm going to continue to strengthen my faith. And she made it so apparent, like that was the foundation of her existence, of her life, that like, this, everything else she's doing, she's willing to give it up. And I think for me, that was the most refreshing thing to see, because it was just so different from what we were constantly so used to seeing. Like, I think we mentioned last time, is that as soon as we heard about her story, we were like, no, like she took off her hijab. Like that's what the first thought that crossed our mind. So I think it was definitely very, very reassuring as a hijabi to see that someone, really prioritized their faith for once.
What was crazy to me is that, it's hard for us, in our daily lives to go about and wear the hijab. Like it's hard for us. But imagine someone in something as like the fashion industry trying to maintain your deen, but also at the same time, fulfilling your career. So I thought that was just amazing. And I give her major props to that.
Emphasizing on her story, the one thing that stood out to me was that a lot of the times when we do see a hijabi woman, make it in the industry, like obviously like the model industry, you don't really see a lot of hijabi. So it was a huge step for, Muslims or like women in Islam in general. But the thing is, like, even though it is a step forward, you don't realize like what she might be going through. And like she highlighted that. And like, me personally, like when I did see her becoming a model, I was like, wow, this is amazing. But we didn't see the dark side of it. Like she mentioned how like even when she was wearing the hijab, it wasn't even a hijab, it was like a t-shirt that like the directors made her put on. So it was basically her basically like bending her like ideals of the hijab just for the industry. Obviously that's not what she wanted, but I feel like that was like really important because she highlighted that. And a lot of the times when we do see, even like not even like a woman in general, but just a Muslim in general, like, making it big in like any industry that they're not dominant in, we're like, okay, yeah, this is a win. But we don't really know, like they might have to like bend their religious rules in order to like succeed in that industry. And I think that's what she had to do, and that's what she emphasized. So that's a part that we don't see. So I was really glad that she touched on that, because it's not all like, it's not all like, glitz and glam. There's always like a dark side to it.
Another thing that I kind of like noticed with that was, Mama, after you mentioned that, she was told to put this t-shirt on her head, and her kind of mentioning that really struck her as odd and struck her as wrong. It also emphasizes the fact that it's not just covering your hair, like that's not all the hijab is. If that's all it was, then she would have no problem wearing a t-shirt. But it's more than that. It's the way you show yourself, it's the way you carry yourself, it's how you speak, it's how you act. And I think that her saying that I'm not allowing myself to wear hijab in certain ways really reiterates that point, that it's beyond just covering your hair.
Yeah, that's an excellent point for sure. And my like biggest takeaway from Halima's story was not just that, she was reflecting on like things that she had done in the past that she wasn't necessarily okay with, but she set the standard for how things would be going forward. And that was what like hit the hardest for me, um, in terms of just like laying out, setting those boundaries of like what you will and won't do and what you won't accept as like okay. And that's, I don't know, I just had mad respect for her, like seeing that.
I do want to kind of transition over to how we as Muslims are trying to adapt into this modern world. Like people always say, the world's always constantly moving. We have to keep up with it if we want to, stay on top. And I feel like her story really emphasized that we should not be trying to modernize Islam, because Islam, it's timeless. There's no time frame on it at all. And we do have to remember that we as Muslims, we have to keep our religion, keep our deen, but at the same time, work that into our daily lives, which is basically balancing deen, dunya and deen, right?
Going off of what Nazish and kind of said, like obviously the hijab isn't just covering your hair. It has to do with your character. It has to do with like, like how modest you are, just in general. And I feel like a lot of the times we do struggle to balance that, especially as an American. I know for a fact, like when I was growing up, obviously it was emphasized, to be modest, don't wear super revealing clothes. But then like you look at other people, especially like when you're a young girl growing up, you see other people and you're like, oh, like, why can't I wear that? Why can't I wear this? But honestly, like, the older I grew and the more understanding I had of Islam and the understanding of like being modest and like just hijab in general, just having that a character as well, I learned to realize that obviously, like, the way, like, the way you compare yourself and the way other people might dress or whatever, like, that's like, it basically like takes you further away from being whatever you want to be. Like for me, I want to be a hijabi, inshallah, but that would like make me further away because I'm comparing myself to like these, these other people that get to wear whatever they want, but obviously they're not like they're not Muslim, they're not practicing. So that's like one thing that I also wanted to emphasize, is like one thing that would help it, like living in this Western culture, is not to compare yourself to other. Instead, surround yourself with Muslims that like, share the same like beliefs as you. And honestly, like it's a lot more empowering than you think it is.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree that, transitioning into becoming a hijabi was made easier because I had friends who were Muslims and hijabis. It's constantly like the focal point of your life. It doesn't make the process any I mean, like less serious, but it does make it much easier to bear, and you kind of have more of a, like outlook on what your life is going to be like. Because I do think also like, for me, I started hijab when I'm much older. I'm into my adult life, and there was no like specific guideline on how to start it, like how to adjust to your adult life wearing the hijab when you've gone your entire life without it. Like there's no one, you watch YouTube videos and it's like how to style your hijab or how to wear it with professional clothes or casual clothes, but no one says like how to start it when you're 22 years old. How do you start wearing hijab when you're 22 years old? And I think that becomes quite frightening. And I think a lot of people our age, or that's one of their main reasons, is like, well, I haven't gone my entire life, so how would I start now? I think like once again, like building that community and having that Muslim community around you really, really helps a lot.
Yeah, like with like my personal story and like starting wearing my hijab, like it's been like really hard. Like even though like I started wearing it when I was in 6th grade, and I'm a senior in high school right now, and it definitely doesn't get easier. And I feel like with your profession, like you feel like a lot of things are limited with wearing a hijab. Like you might not be able to like fit in a more creative career because your hijab kind of stops you. Like I know for when I was little, like I loved watching TV and I wanted to be like, a Bollywood actress or something like that, something fun. But like your hijab kind of like, I feel like it kind of stops you, and like you're not able to um experience all that fun stuff. But with us, with like you being the first person in a industry like that, like young people might really get inspiration from someone like that.
This kind of touches back to our top, what we went over last time in our previous part one. What I wanted, sorry. So, what I had said before was that, and Anam had mentioned this too, that people don't really see past your hijab, and that's all they see, and that's kind of what comes into whenever you're pursuing any career. Honestly, it doesn't have to be like something as great as the fashion industry. It can be something small, but even then we have so much difficulty. But I do feel like the overall message to take away from Halima's story is that um, regardless of how the world's moving, we are Muslims before anything else, and our religion comes before any of that. So we shouldn't try to modernize who we are. We shouldn't try to modernize our religion. There's a set of rules that are put in front of us, and that's what we have to follow. But we often get caught up with trying to find loopholes around things. And I myself am guilty of all these sort of things, and it's hard because of these times that we live in. And I did want to compare it sort of to back in our prophet's time. I don't want to say like it wasn't hard for them, but we had different struggles than them. It wasn't the same thing with us. We're constantly having to compare ourselves to all these other people, models, our friends, influencers, all these sort of things. So that was my biggest takeaway from it. Does anyone else want to add on to the Halima story before we move on? We're good? Okay. So I did want to touch on something that I had learned these past few weeks is the concept of bear. And bear means you're obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even when you don't like it. And I feel like that's also something that can be tied in with hijab. You're obedient. You might not love it all the time. You might not love how you look. You might not love how you feel, but you're still doing it. So do any of the hijabis want to touch on that?
Oh, you know what? I'll start. For me, I noticed this. This is especially like when I first became hijabi, probably um around ages like 12 through 15. And I touched on this a little bit in the last pod too. Um, so there were times I had to stop swimming in public because when I was a teenager, bikinis were not really a thing yet. So I didn't have like a modest swimsuit, like a way to stay covered and still like go out and everything. And so I had to like, and that's funny because I can't even swim. I just basically splashed around in the water. But I kind of had to like stop doing certain things and like not necessarily change my behavior, but adjust my behavior because I had started wearing hijab. And it was a really humbling experience. And I think it was a good learning experience for me, because now I had serious FOMO. I had like fear of missing out when I was younger, but now as an adult or whatever, it doesn't bother me half as much. Now I'm kind of just like, yeah, I don't swim in public, that's the deal. But, growing up when I was, still starting out as a hijabi, I definitely didn't like it. And, but like I kept telling myself that this is for God, and this is how that I show God that I love him, is that, even if it's something that I don't like, I know that I'm still pleasing him. And that kind of made it easier to swallow, day in and day out. And then the older I got, the more, it was less of a chore, and more of just like something that I was happy to do. And that's kind of like, that's one of my more superficial struggles, was bir, but yeah.
I would say that I feel the same way. Like for me, it was never something that I struggled with, but rather I was so grateful to have. Like now that I think about it, if I wasn't able to wear the hijab, I don't think I would feel like I've had like this newfound sense of empowerment, and I felt like my faith was strengthened, and now I'm just of course I'm constantly reminded all the time, but I wearing the hijab just constantly like checks me. I have like this self balance, like I'm a hijabi, I'm a Muslim, like I'm constantly thinking about it, like this is my priority in this life. And so I was thinking about this just a couple of days ago. I was like, I'm so grateful to be a woman and to have the opportunity to be a Muslim woman and have the opportunity to wear the hijab. I think that I'm so blessed to have that. So I don't know, I find like even in the hard times there's always positivity.
Yeah, and I always feel like when you're like in public places and you see like another hijabi, I feel like I'm representing the like majority of like the Muslim around me. Like even though there's no one else that's wearing a hijab, or even though there's no one Muslim around me, I feel like I'm representing the entire like Muslim community.
So I want to touch a little bit on what Bushra just said. I also feel that as well, as like that I'm representing the community. And I noticed that people, like, were treating me differently, but to me it wasn't all bad. Like, a lot of us have negative experiences from being visibly Muslim, and that is definitely like really stressful, and it's just taxing on the soul. But I also noticed like this was something that happened when I was in high school, where there was this really goofy kid in class. It was a young man, and I noticed that whenever he spoke to me, he would change his tone, and he was always like really respectful and like thoughtful with his words in a way that he wasn't when I observed him with his friends. And so that was the first time that I realized, like, or I felt like, being a hijabi like earned me that respect. I wouldn't say status necessarily, but I he respected me, and I could tell that he respected me by the way that he spoke to me. And that was it kind of changed my tone and like my thought processes about the hijab, because before that it still felt chore-ish, but then after that kind of encounter, I like my outlook on it changed. And so I just wanted to say that really quick.
I had a question for you guys. Some of my friends, or even people that do wear the hijab, they sometimes, they're not really feeling, or they don't feel too strong about wearing it, and then they have like this feeling on taking it off, but they get past that. So have you guys ever felt like that? And if you did, what did you tell yourself, or what did you do to get yourself past that doubt, I guess, to continue wearing it?
That is a loaded question, but I will go to give the other girls time to prepare. Um, so again, it was my teenage years where I struggled on and off. I would say, so I started wearing it in 2008, and I thought there were so many times in that year alone where I was like, you know what? Maybe I jumped into this too fast. Maybe I didn't make the right choice. Maybe I should just slow down and, take a step back or like go to, I don't know, part-time or something. I had a lot of, conflicting thoughts and everything. And most of it was because I felt like I stood out. Like, even though I was at Muslim school, my home life, my family, like nobody else in my family practices wearing hijab. So I still felt really isolated. And I don't know. I grappled with that decision for a really long time. But then 2008 was also the year that I went to Muslim youth camp for the first time. And that was an experience where I got to meet 120 other um, young Muslim girls between the age of 12 and 18. And I learned that there were others who were like, in different stages of like being hijabi and being Muslim, period. And I didn't feel judged and I didn't feel like, I was alone. And so after that experience at camp of just being surrounded by this like really diverse set of Muslimas, I felt like my resolve strengthened. And so I decided not to take it off because for me, yeah, my first year was definitely my most difficult. So yeah.
Um, I haven't really had such dilemma yet. And I think it's because I had been thinking about wearing a hijab for so long. And I knew that this was a commitment, and I knew like the foundations that I needed to create, and the kind of basis that I needed religiously, and how quote unquote pious I needed to be. And I constantly just thought about like what was keeping me from putting it on. So I think that, and because I am, like I said before, like surrounded by a very good um, group of Muslims and group of friends and very supporting family, haven't, alhamdulillah, I haven't faced that challenge. But I do have moments where I feel like, and this is sometimes, like I feel like, oh, am I still religious enough? Like, am I representing hijabis properly, or am I representing, our ummah properly? And so then that's just me like getting down on myself. But as for like society and judgment, I haven't really felt like I should take it off. Alhamdulillah.
For me, like the struggle is like so like I face that struggle like so often. But again, like with like I have two older sisters, so they always encourage me and they kind of like show me the path and like always encourage me when it comes to um my struggle with the hijab. I always look up to them, so I think that really helps. But again, I started when I was in sixth grade, so I didn't really know what I was doing. Like my mom encouraged me, but it wasn't my own decision to do it. She really like it was something that she wanted me to do, so I did start it. So it was a little difficult in the beginning because it wasn't my choice, but I knew why she. But like now I understand why she was so adamant on me starting, and alhamdulillah for that for sure. But yeah, I think the struggle for me is like still like it still goes on. But yeah, I know why I'm doing it, so I think that helps.
Knowing why you're doing it is like the most important like part of it. And to me, I had to redefine why I was doing hijab with like recently, like within the past like few years. And I was like, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for God. And so I don't know, just like doing that really helped me like um focus my priorities.
Thank you all for sharing that. Um, you guys like sharing your stories. It really does mean a lot to us, especially on the podcast, like on a platform. It's really important to have that set out to the world. Um, so I do want to wrap this conversation up now. A lot of the takeaways that we've had from part 1 and 2 is that the hijab isn't just a head covering. There's so much more that comes behind it. There's so much more that we have to encompass before wearing it. It's a lot that we have to learn. It's a lot we have to go through as Muslims. I feel like we definitely, a lot of us aren't really completely there with our deen and all. I'm sorry if you can hear my cat. but a lot of us aren't really there within our deen, but we still put it on, hoping to get closer to our religion. And I feel like that's also just so beautiful. Beautiful similarly to those who are right there, they feel like they're ready to put it on. And there's just such a beauty in that struggle that people go through to wearing it. It's really just important to remember that a true believer will always put what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants before anything else. And I really hope, with that being said, that a lot of us out here who don't wear the hijab, me included, inshallah, we all gain the strength to put it on one day. It's hard. It's really hard for all of us, you know, but I feel like it's just important to remember why we're doing it. We're doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to have that we're obedient even if we don't want to. We should be that strong in our religion, in our faith. And with that being said, I do want to close this off. Thank you all to our guests that joined today. It really means a lot that you came out and put your voice out on this platform to us. Thank you so much for listening in, and we'll be back soon, inshallah.